Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. When we hear the term ransomware, we often think of high-dollar ransoms and large companies, but as all of you pointed out, individuals and communities are also affected by these attacks when they can't get gas to go to work, when their school or local hospital is impacted by an attack, or when their own data is compromised. I've heard from local hospitals about the immense cost and manpower it takes to try to harden a whole system to prevent a cyber attack. With my hospital, it was training up a workforce to not fall prey to phishing, and then to recruit and hire the best and brightest in cybersecurity, as you mentioned. Dr. Demeff, I can tell you from common experience that just a few hours of power outage completely handicapped my ability to take care of patients. So I can only imagine how this sort of thing would impact a hospital, especially for days on end. And you already described for my colleague, Mr. Griffith, how those impacts on patient care may be felt more acutely in lesser resourced and rural hospitals. Could you be a little bit more specific about how sister hospitals, if there even are sister hospitals, local entities, private sector actors in the federal government could better support specifically those healthcare systems so that they have the resources they need?
Thank you so much for that question. I think the first and most important thing is the preparatory efforts to prevent and then mitigate the impacts of those attacks. So looking at your particular geographic area and understanding where are the linchpin hospitals, right? Which ones are providing trauma services? Which ones are stroke centers? These types of specialized hospitals who take care of hyperacute patient care should be identified early and prioritized for that type of preparation, as well as resources to ensure that when they do go down or when they are attacked, they're able to fail gracefully as much as possible while still take care of patients. So there's a preparatory step in that. Second, in the response phase of this, I think it is common for a hospital to reach out to law enforcement early. I think that has been a pretty common theme, and that they'll reach out to the FBI to help with investigatory efforts and response. But whether or not that type of communication transcends to other government agencies such as CISA or the FDA, even if medical devices are involved, can sometimes be not happen. And so I think that's partly the responsibility of a particular hospital, but also of the bodies that accredit hospitals, as well as local public health authorities, in being able to quickly propagate meaningful metrics of patient care to authorities that can help, who can bring resources in the hour of need to help hospitals still take care of patients while addressing that. So that type of interagency communication is lacking.
That's really helpful. And I know in Washington State, our Washington State Hospital Association does these kinds of drills with hospitals to help them prepare. And then speaking of incentives, I know a hospital's reputation is really integral to its ability to serve the public. It seems like one of the things we need to communicate to the public is that even with the best preparation, these attacks are so common that you can still be hit. Do you think that's a role for public, for the government, for the private sector, to kind of communicate this to the public?
The communication of that, thank you very much. The communication of that is rather difficult. I've always said that there should be no competitive advantage in healthcare cybersecurity, right? There should never be billboards saying, come to our hospital, we didn't have this happen. Because quite frankly, I would agree with you that because of increased sophistication of these types of attacks, no one is immune from this. No health organization is immune, regardless of their cybersecurity budget. So at the end of the day, I think communicating that that it's an unfortunate consequence of the hyperconnectivity of healthcare, that there are steps being done and resources provided to hospitals to prepare and mitigate that is key, while still trying to restore trust in consumers and how they approach a particular hospital for healthcare.
Thank you.
That is key. That's really important.
I have one last question for Mr. Reiner. Now, I appreciate your comments about our country not really being quite at the right place to be able to prohibit payment of ransoms, even though that might slow or stop these cyber attacks. So for now, what can companies do, for example, to have duplicate systems, a wall between them so that they could recover afterwards, maybe without paying the ransom?
So one of the pieces that we haven't really discussed here today, outside of some of the elements of what companies can be doing to prepare, is to actually, what we discovered through our process is that a lot of companies actually don't have a plan. They actually haven't vetted out at the executive level what to do, whether or not to pay. And they have companies that they can turn to that can help them through that process, whether it's their insurance company or a forensics company or some of the folks on the panel here with me today. But actually having that in place ahead of time. Companies do tabletop this, they do exercise against it, but not all of them, and I think that's a resource that everyone should have in hand, to have a checklist, to have an actual plan to help make that decision if you do get hit.
Thank you very much. Yield back.